The race to find a new offensive coordinator is officially on in the Pacific Northwest with 3 interviews now scheduled for Mike Macdonald and company. Who's the best fit of these 3 coaching candidates to replace Ryan Grubb? We'll be breaking it all down here on this Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our latest Blue Friday installment by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, whether you're listening from down in Oakland, California, or Joplin, Missouri. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. And for our Southern California listeners, we have you in our thoughts and prayers during the difficult times with the fires going on. And we are hoping that things are going to start to go back to normal here in the next day or two, and you guys can start to get things put back together. It's certainly been difficult to watch that from afar. I've had snowballs hitting me in the face in Colorado, so it's been the other end of the spectrum. But my hearts are with you guys, and hopefully we can get this taken care of soon with all the tragedy that has gone on in that part of the country this week. This episode, we are going to be diving into the 3 reported offensive coordinator interviews for the Seahawks. We're going to discuss those candidates. We've got some free agents to watch in the upcoming wildcard round in the NFL playoffs and 2024 superlatives on the offensive side of the football. Brought courtesy of our friends over at PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here in our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. On Tuesday in his final press conference, Mike Macdonald said the Seahawks had submitted a couple of requests for interviews for their new offensive coordinator vacancy. Of course, he didn't tell us who was getting those requests, but we found out pretty quickly. And now there have been 3 candidates revealed that at least the Seahawks have requested interviews. 2 of those candidates, we already know when they were supposed to speak with the Seahawks. One of them met with the Seahawks today. So we're going to take a deep dive into those 3 candidates because, Nick, last week when Rob and I looked at 17 different coordinator candidates, only one of those 17 is in these 3. So we've got a couple new guys to talk about who really do fit the type of coaches that we were talking about. They just didn't happen to be on our radar with that. And it creates an exciting situation for the Seahawks, especially the first coach. And you and I were talking about before the show, well, who do we want to talk about first? We have got to talk about Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach for the Detroit Lions. And one of the coaches we mentioned last week as a potential candidate was Adam Stenavich from the Green Bay Packers, their offensive coordinator, who really is a glorified offensive line coach. He doesn't make the play calls in Green Bay. But then this is another NFC North former NFL offensive lineman. Stenavich played in the league. Hank Fraley played 11 seasons in the NFL, and he was on 4 straight division champion Philadelphia Eagles teams, started on that offensive line in the early 2000s. You look at his picture on the Detroit Lions website, and it just screams, run the damn football. And that got me excited.
Yes, I know that, my mom and dad taught me not to judge a book by its cover. I am 100% judging a book by its cover here in a good way. You look at his picture, you look at the Lions logo, okay, we know what kind of brand of football this guy probably wants to play, especially former offensive lineman. Hank Fraley, certainly one of my favorites of the names that has popped up in one of 3 interviews so far. Since just throwing some stats out there, since 2022, the Lions have had a top 11 rushing attack each season of 3 seasons. And per Pro Football Focus, the offensive line, which is more his purview with the Lions, they haven't finished lower than 8th in their Pro Football Focus rankings in the last 3 years, and they've been amongst the top 5 in the last couple of years. So clearly, just an absolute model organization. And you can tell with what Mike Macdonald's looking for and what he's kind of hinting at what he's looking for. He would love to model his organization, at least, especially on offense, around what the Lions do. And because it's of the Ravens ilk as well. The physical, run it down your throat, ice the game. I mean, we saw that with with the game against the Vikings. That game, the Lions just sucked their absolute souls out of their bodies with the run game. That is just what we're craving for here in Seattle. So a guy from that tree, I know he hasn't called plays, but Mike Macdonald did say that that's not necessarily a prerequisite, and we don't know how good of a play caller he is unless you give him a chance. But you do like the roots of where he is from and what kind of mentality he might bring.
And I love everything I'm reading from guys that have played for him, because he was one of the few coaches that was a carryover from the previous staff that Dan Campbell ended up keeping because his players were vouching for this guy. And the last 3 years, they have been in the top 6 in lowest sack percentage on Jared Goff. So they don't give up sacks, the offensive line. The run game is tenacious. And like you said, they just suck the life out of opponents. When it's time to finish a game, they go get it done with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in this offensive line. So that mentality, that toughness, that seems to be something that Mike Macdonald really is looking for here as he tries to find a replacement for Ryan Grubb. He just didn't feel like he had that with Ryan Grubb as the play caller. And the other thing that I absolutely love about this guy, when you go back deeper in his history, he was the assistant O-line coach in Minnesota and one of Adrian Peterson's amazing seasons. And Minnesota had an awesome offensive line. So he's just got a long track record where he has been heavily involved in building great offensive lines. I do think he is going to have to find a pass game coordinator to link with him. That has been a reported thing that he's already trying to find that offensive coordinator, assistant, so to speak, in the passing game that can help him out because he's a run game guy as an offensive lineman. Maybe it's Antoine Randall, the receiver coach for the Lions. It could be another candidate out there that would make some sense, but he needs to have that pass game partner to go with him, with his bread and butter being the run game, which Mike Macdonald wants that. Shifting gears, we're staying in the NFC North, and I've been surprised because there's been a lot of fans that have been down on this second candidate. I am not in that group, and that is Thomas Brown, who was the interim head coach for the Chicago Bears. And this has been the common denominator in terms of what fans, it's recency bias. The Bears scored 3 points against us in week 17, and he was the head coach. We don't want him. If you look at what Thomas Brown has done historically, this guy was the assistant head coach for Sean McVay with the Rams for 3 years. And one of those years was when they won the Super Bowl. And then the Bears this year, when they fired good, familiar friend Shane Waldron as offensive coordinator in the middle of the season, in the 3 games after that, which was against the Packers, Vikings, and Lions, the juggernauts of the NFC North, they scored 22 points per game, and they lost 2 of those games by 3 points apiece. I mean, they were very competitive. One of them, they went to overtime with the Vikings. They averaged 18 points per game this year. So they were much better when Brown took over the offense. Then when he had to juggle head coaching duties, the offense started to fall apart some, but I'm not blaming him for that. The guy was trying to juggle all kinds of stuff. He had never been a head coach before. I think you put him in this offense that he could do some really fun things, and he's got running back and tight end coach backgrounds as well. So I'm not down on this guy. In fact, I'm very interested. If you're not going to get Fraley, I certainly think that Thomas Brown can coach.
I get why people are down. I kind of looked at, okay, what has he done since he's left, Sean McVay's shadow or his nursery, so to speak. And the Panthers in 2023 were pretty brutal. And I know there's a talent thing in there too. The cupboard was somewhat bare, but 31st in scoring and 32nd in passing, 31st in scoring, 32nd dead last in yards, next to last in passing. The Panthers, when he was the OC there, that was absolutely brutal watch. The Bears this year were pretty brutal. You make some good points that when he was just had offensive duties, it was a bit better for Caleb Williams and company. But it does give me pause to see what he's done since he's left Sean McVay's shadow. And I know that's not necessarily fair because here we are talking about Frank Fraley, having not left the Lions shadow quite yet, but that he's more of an unknown quantity at this point. But with Thomas Brown, it's hard to totally gauge it. But what he's done since he's left Sean McVay, I get he's Super Bowl Sean McVay. I know that's a coveted coaching tree, but I can't unsee what the Panthers looked like last year. I can't unsee what the Bears mostly looked like this year. Recency bias, yes. Talent deficiency, yes. But you would have liked to see just a bit more, and maybe that's not fair, but it does leave maybe not a bad taste in my mouth, but I definitely have questions.
And while I love Fraley as a candidate and I'm willing to be open to the idea of Thomas Brown, of the three that have been linked to the Seahawks so far, I am highest on Klint Kubiak. And I know that the Saints last year had a rough season and they lost a lot of games. The offense fell apart. But if you look at the injured reserve list for that football team, they scored more than 40 points a game their first two games. And then after that, dudes just dropped like flies. It really became a mash unit. They were playing second and third stringers almost across the board in their offensive line. They were down to like their fourth receiver by week 8. Derek Carr then went down. I mean, this guy was trying to coach an offense with Spencer Rattler throwing to guys that might not have been on the roster except for the preseason, if not for injuries. I mean, it was a war of attrition. And then, oh, by the way, Alvin Kamara goes down the last 4 games as well. I mean, they just had injuries galore. This offense looked great when they had most of their guys healthy. It just, once you get to a point, an offensive coordinator can only mask so many injuries. And I look at Kubiak. This is a guy that he learned from his father, a Super Bowl winning coach that learned from Mike Shanahan. He's learned from Kyle Shanahan. He was with the 49ers 2 years ago as their pass game coordinator. Look what happened with Brock Purdy. Took off, got him to the Super Bowl. I know everybody's going to be looking at his offensive coordinator record, but I mean, Kirk Cousins had the 9th most touchdown passes in the league playing for this guy in 2021 on an offense that was missing some pieces that they have now. I think Klint Kubiak is an excellent young coach. And he's been in the league for 11 years and he's only 37. Like, he's Mike Macdonald's age and he's been in the league that long. I am really high on Kubiak. And I think when you see what he did with Brock Purdy and Kirk Cousins a few years ago, I think Geno Smith would be ecstatic to play for this guy. And you know, coming from the Shanahan tree and Kubiak tree, that he likes to run the football too.
Yeah, of the three, I think Kubiak has the highest floor. I just like the resume, like you mentioned. And don't forget, the Saints, remember the Saints of the first 2 games? They would look like the 2013 Denver Broncos on offense those first 2 games, 91 points. And, you know, he's not unfamiliar with trying to get the best out of a quarterback who's maybe been cast off by another franchise, Derek Carr, Geno Smith. You know, he's got some of that experience too. Still finished 14th in rushing this year, even with some just devastated by injuries. So he definitely has the highest floor of the 3.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting candidates here, to be honest with you. I like all 3 of these guys. When they were trying to hire the OC last year, it kind of felt like hit and miss because how late it was in the cycle. But you've got some really intriguing options here, and we know there are going to be others before the Seahawks ultimately make the decision who's going to replace Ryan Grubb. When we come back, it is time for some 2024 superlatives, looking back at the season, the end of season awards, and we're going to be on the offensive side of the football. We'll get to that coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give you their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money-back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full-service real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. This week, I've got Saquon Barkley going for more than 1 rushing touchdown. It's quick, simple, and easy to make such a pick. I can challenge myself and my friends. Here's a special offer for Locked On listeners. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. He's Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. It's now 2 times a day. Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans with your morning cup of NFL espresso. And then Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars bringing the humor and the insight you're not going to find anywhere else. That's Locked On NFL twice a day on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Make it your second listen today. It's time for our yearly superlatives. We're going to start on the offensive side of the football. We'll do defense on next Friday's episode. And Nick, we've got 6 categories we are going to go through. And obviously, with Ryan Grubb getting fired on Monday as a result, it was not the season that the Seahawks were hoping for on the offensive side of the football, but there were still plenty of highlights. Let's start with the most obvious here, the most valuable offensive player for the Seahawks. And I don't feel like this is as cut and dry as it is some years on the offensive side of the football. In fact, I think I know where you're going to be heading with this one.
I mean, the easier answer is to go quarterback, but I'm not. I don't think Geno Smith was the most, I mean, by definition, yes, the quarterback was the most valuable, obviously, but as far as, adding versus average, above average to the team, Jackson Smith-Njigba, because with Geno Smith, I'm not saying he stinks. I'm not saying, get rid of Geno, blah, blah, blah. I'm not helping light the torches for the anti-Geno mob, but he led the NFL. He led the NFL in red zone interceptions, second most interceptions in the league, 23rd in QBR. Not the greatest overall year for Geno Smith. I know there is a lot going on around him that led to that, but Jackson Smith-Njigba is my MVP. Tied a franchise record for receptions. His 1,130 yards is 12th all time, and that's actually would have ranked second in DK Metcalf's career. Only his record-setting 2020 would have he had more yards than that. Where this offense be without Jackson Smith-Njigba? I shudder to think. I cower at the thought of what this offense would have looked like without 17 games of JSN because we had Metcalf banged up. Tyler Lockett clearly has lost a little bit of a step there and wasn't much of a factor in some games. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think, added some serious juice to this offense. And yeah, I just look at where this offense would be. Obviously, without Geno, we saw what Sam Howell looked like for a brief time. So maybe there's your argument there. But as far as, bringing the average to, above average to excellent, I'm going to go Jackson Smith-Njigba with just a phenomenal season.
And because you mentioned Sam Howell already, I've got to go with Geno Smith. And I know it's the low-hanging fruit when you're talking about the quarterback position, and I understand the interceptions. You go back and look, this is just my opinion. There's going to be subjectivity to this. 8 of the 15 interceptions he threw are not on him, in my opinion. They were either because of really bad offensive line play or terrible route distribution, which I think that was also part of the equation for ultimately Ryan Grubb not having a job after 1 year. So you look at the numbers, and I get it. The red zone interceptions, some of those were horrific. He made some bad decisions, but he's the 20th quarterback in NFL history to complete more than 70% of his passes in a full season. I mean, it just doesn't happen very often. He was in the top 5 in passing yards this year. He finished on a strong note with 4 passing touchdowns, and he did that with Tyler Lockett being diminished, DK Metcalf not looking like himself for most of the second half of the season, and an offensive line that, quite frankly, protection was optional for much of the season. So I'm going to go with Geno on this. And again, I know it's the low-hanging fruit. I think in other years, I might have gone with a different position group here. And Jackson Smith-Njigba obviously had a great season, but the offense was not great this year. Geno, to me, still made enough plays here in dire situations a lot of the year that I've got him there. Let's shift gears now to the most improved player on the team. And you just named the guy that I'm going to be giving it to as your MVP, but I know you want to go on a little different tangent in terms of the most improved player on the roster who took advantage of a lot of opportunities to play in the second half of the season.
And I feel like, the most improved award, whatever team you're part of, that does happen where it's just a person who takes advantage of the opportunity. And Zach Charbonnet, I mean, he had more. So let's talk about this for a second. With less carries than Ken Walker overall, he had a higher yards per carry, more 10-plus yard runs, more touchdowns, more first downs, more receiving yards, and 0 fumbles to Ken Walker's 1. Do we have, forget about quarterback controversy. Do we have a running back controversy in Seattle? I think that's an honest question because, Walker certainly has his skill set when he's on. He's really, really fun to watch, but I think there's some limitations And I think they do complement each other well, these two running backs. But you saw more power schemes with Zach Charbonnet, and he thrived with that. I do wonder what the fit is perhaps with this new OC. Is Ken Walker a better fit for that offense? I don't know. But for now, what my eyes told me was Zach Charbonnet was one of the most improved players on this entire roster, and he was a blast to watch.
I got to give it to JSN just for the fact that he led all receivers in slot receptions, slot yardage, yards after the catch from the slot by a landslide. Like, the dude was in a league of his own. And last year he had a good but not great rookie season. To see him really emerge as Seattle's new number one receiver, I am going that far now. I mean, I think DK has number one receiver talent, but maybe you want to go 1A, 1B. But right now I feel like JSN is the number one receiver for this football team. And I expect that's going to be the case moving forward because this guy's just going to keep getting better. So he's an easy selection for me on this one. Let's go to the one that, sometimes you got to pick the best from a not so good position group. And we're going to do that with the best lineman or top lineman on this team. And to me, this is easy. And I know Charles Cross gave up 47 pressures. He gave up 6 sacks, but he still had a 96% pass protection efficiency rate because Seattle threw the ball so darn much. I think the numbers overall were pretty solid. And there were some games where he really looked like a former top 10 pick. He was still too inconsistent for my liking, but look, that's still better than most of what we saw from this offensive line. At least there were stretches, lengthy stretches at times, where he looked like a potentially Pro Bowl caliber tackle. You can't say that really about the rest of this offensive line.
No, he's kind of the winner by default. He was the highest graded offensive lineman per Pro Football Focus. Like you mentioned, 6 sacks. Certainly left tackles had a better season than that. He did start off, and you can find tweets from mine after 2 or 3 or 4 games. He was not only on a Pro Bowl trajectory, after about 2 or 3 games, he was kind of an all-pro trajectory, just with the lack of pressures allowed. But, obviously that he kind of took on water later in the year. Still, if this is what the Seahawks get out of their left tackle for the next 3-4 years, and they shore up the interior, and then Abe Lucas is healthy on the right side, I don't hate that. I don't hate it, that kind of season from Charles Cross. Is it a top 10 overall pick kind of left tackle season? Maybe not. But by default, he was the best, and I don't think that's an insult. I think he had a solid season. There was he's not perfect. He's not exactly, a future Hall of Famer quite. He's not Walter Jones. That's not fair. But from what the Seahawks have had in the past, I'll take a 2024 type campaign from Charles Cross, especially if they can improve the rest of the line.
Shifting gears now, we're going to go to our biggest disappointment. And yes, we do have to go down this road. We can't have everything be sunshine and rainbows. And as much as it disappoints me, Tyler Lockett's had a phenomenal career. Tyler Lockett, to me, is a Ring of Honor player. I hope he's back next year. I hope that it's a situation Seattle and Lockett decide, hey, we want to be together for another year or 2. Let's see if we can find a way to make this contract manageable in return. But the proof is in the pudding. 6 of the last 8 games, he had 2 or fewer receptions. And actually, it was 7 of his last 9. He just was a non-factor in most games for the Seahawks after about week 6. He started the year okay, but you're looking at nearly 50% reduction in receptions, receiving yards. Didn't find the end zone very often. And not all of that is on Tyler Lockett. I think the offense was catered more to JSN. DK still got his targets, tight ends involved. But you're seeing a guy that is declining as a player. And again, I'm hoping he's back for a price point that works for both sides. I don't know that that's going to happen. But in terms of there still being somewhat high expectations at target number 3, wasn't able to live up to those this year.
Yeah, that's fair. I went with kind of the reverse of my most improved. So my disappointment was Ken Walker. For the second straight year, Zach Charbonnet outperformed him in yards per carry. And Charbonnet was doing things that Walker just wasn't doing. I know the offensive line was a mess. I get that. Run game was a mess. It's not necessarily all Ken Walker's fault. But, he gets a slice of the blame pie a little bit. And, I know he doesn't get maybe half the pie like my pumpkin pie portion in Thanksgiving. But he does get a slice. He gets a slice of this pie for how poor the run game was early on in the year. And just then you see what Zach Charbonnet was doing with virtually the same offensive line, a better yards per carry. Charbonnet had yards per carry on par with David Montgomery and better than Kyron Williams for the Rams. So, I would love for this to be a Sonic and Knuckles thing, like in Detroit. But so far that hasn't. It's either been I want it to be Sonic and Knuckles and not one or the other, because that's kind of what it's felt like. It's either one has a great game while others hurt or non-factor. I would love for them both to thrive together, but it hasn't really come together for now pretty much 2 seasons for Ken Walker.
Let's get to our last one here, the top rookie. And I'm going to be honest with you. I did give consideration for Satoa Lamea because this team did run for almost 5 yards per carry in the last 5 games that he started. His pass protection was shaky, but he really lifted the run game. I thought he was maybe the biggest culprit for that run game improving, especially all the gap schemes. But look, A.J. Barner did it all season long. Barner finished second among rookie tight ends with 4 touchdown catches. Geno Smith seemed to have chemistry with him building early in the year, and late in the season, it seemed like he was really going to him a lot. And the other thing I love about A.J. Barner is that dude wants to run over you. He wants to be a Mack truck out there after he catches the football. And so he's going to get yards after the catch. He averaged almost 6 yards per reception after the catch this year. I think he was 11th among tight ends, according to Pro Football Focus. The blocking improved. I didn't think he was great early in the year, but he was better late in the season in the blocking department. And you add in the fact he already's eclipsed what I expected as a receiver. To me, this is an easy pick for him to be the top rookie. You can maybe make an argument that he's the top rookie in the entire roster.
Absolutely. And shout out to Charlie the Unicorn in the live chat who called this out with A.J. Barner. And I'm a huge A.J. Barner fan. I mean, I tweeted it out, I think it was last week. He was the second best tight end, a rookie tight end after Brock Bowers. I mean, Brock Bowers, he's on a different planet himself. But as far as just rookie tight end ranks, A.J. Barner, second in Pro Football Focus grade, second in first downs, second in receiving touchdowns, third in receptions, fourth in yards, and first among all rookie tight ends, and actually first on the Seahawks as well, passer rating when targeted. So he just was effective, and he was a willing blocker. I'm a huge A.J. Barner fan. I'm really excited for year 2.
Let's get to our wild card round free agent analysis. That'll be coming up next. Nick and I are going to be dishing out 3 players that we are going to be watching during wild card weekend that are pending free agents that we have some interest in potentially joining the Seahawks in 2025. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can bet on everything from Matthew Stafford throwing multiple touchdowns against the Vikings to Puka Nacua being the first player with a 30-plus yard reception. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Wild card weekend will be upon us starting tomorrow. Unfortunately, the Seahawks will not be partaking in it. But from a front office and scouting perspective, Nick, you and I like to put on that hat this time of year. There's going to be plenty of pending free agents that are going to be playing in these games this weekend, and the Seahawks will try to get a few of these players once we get to the free agency period if they end up hitting the market. And with that in mind, you and I are going to be discussing 3 players apiece that we want to watch closely this weekend. And I'm going to give you the floor first because this is going to draw some – I don't think it's going to draw ire. There's going to be some fans that maybe get – excited about this, but I know that there is a quarterback this weekend that you are going to be watching closely.
Well, I'm going to be watching Sam Darnold for a few reasons. He is going to be a free agent, and there is an interesting discussion to be had there. I don't think this is not me saying Sam Darnold should be, signing for 5-year, 200 whatever million. He's the future guy. No, I am not saying that. One, you might be able to get him cheaper than Sam, or than if you're trying to extend Geno for 40 million plus. I'm not sure. We'll see what Sam Darnold can get. So he might be a cheaper technically option if Geno wants a new deal versus what Sam Darnold could command on the open market, which is cheaper, is my question. And because he's a bridge guy, I think Sam Darnold is at best a bridge guy. I still think you got to try to find your future quarterback in the draft or via trade. of a young quarterback. I'm not totally I'm not totally off the trade for JJ McCarthy train, but Sam Darnold, obviously he's gonna make more than $10 million next year, which is what he made this year. I think that's pretty safe to say. He had a better big time throw rate than Joe Burrow, more yards per attempt than Josh Allen. I mean, he had a fantastic year. Now, was that Kevin O'Connell and that coaching staff maybe boosting it out of him? If he went somewhere else, it wouldn't be as the shine would kind of wear off. Maybe. My main question is, if you want a bridge quarterback for next year, who's cheaper, Sam Darnold or Geno Smith? Because I think that's where the discussion could be had. Because when you look at the numbers, 2022 Geno Smith versus 2024 Sam Darnold, fairly comparable in some aspects. The price point will obviously be the sticking point, but I think it's a conversation at least exploring, and certainly a quarterback. I think the entire football world wants to see what Sam Darnold will do in the playoffs.
I'm going to stay in that same game for my first free agent I'm watching, but I just mentioned Tyler Lockett, and again, I'm hoping to see number 16 back next year somehow. I just don't know that that's going to be feasible, and I think there's going to be teams that have interest in Tyler Lockett because I still think he's got some good football in him. This year, not all of it was his fault that the numbers went down the way that they did. I still think this guy can be really productive, at least as a second or third receiver in the NFL. Maybe it's in Seattle, but assuming he's not coming back because that cap hits $31 million, he will not be back on his current contract. We know that. Steal somebody from a division rival. Tutu Atwell has not posted the most gaudy numbers. He's had other receivers taking the bulk of the targets, but we've seen what he could do against the Seahawks. He's had a number of big plays. He's got some similarities, Tyler Lockett, especially early in his career, where he's a guy that can really take the top of a defense. He's got some savvy route running ability, really speedy, quickness for days. And the Rams are going to reach a point where I don't know that they're going to be able to afford to pay a third receiver. And he hasn't necessarily had the numbers to justify a big contract. But if you're Seattle, you're saying, hey, that's going to be a cheaper deal than bringing back Tyler Lockett, especially in his current contract. He's a lot younger player. He's got legitimate 4.3 speed. That would seem like a complimentary receiver that you can do some addition by subtraction to an NFC West foe and maybe potentially upgrade yourself at that third receiver spot moving into 2025 and beyond.
Well, now I want to go to the trenches because that's really what we're all here for, right? Dalton Risner, I think it's Risner. I can't remember. The Vikings. Dalton Risner out of the Vikings. He's 0 sacks allowed and 345 pass blocking snaps. Got a bit of a late start to his season, starting the season with an injury, but the Seahawks need some serious beef up front. Where's the beef? It's not in Seattle right now. They need it. And I was kind of just perusing when we were talking about doing this segment, looking at the free agent guard class or the interior lineman class. It is a stacked interior offensive lineman free agent class. So give me Dalton Risner or maybe even Josh Myers, the center from the Packers. If the Seahawks maybe aren't happy with Olawatimi, I think he did some good things late in the year. But if they want to upgrade and get a veteran in there, Josh Myers, the center from the Packers, is also set to be a free agent. Only 1 sack allowed in 518 pass blocking snaps. That Packers offense is really, really impressive, and you like some things that they do schematically, and getting Josh Myers in there to maybe kind of be that spearhead at center, which I've been craving for since the early days of Justin Britt, or maybe even longer at center. Get Josh Myers, I think would be a great get. Is he an all-pro center? No. He won't break the bank, but I think he'd be a solid vet to at least compete with Olawatimi. So the 2 interior guys I want to look at this weekend, Dalton Risner out of Minnesota and Josh Myers from the other NFC North rival Packers, because the Seahawks obviously need to absolutely address over and over again in many ways, many draft, free agency, the interior offensive line.
There's a few players on the teams that have bye weeks that I'm really intrigued to talk about, and we'll get to that the following week. But I want to go to the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, in particular Baltimore, because we know Mike Macdonald came from Baltimore, and he's familiar with these players. And when I look at what Mike Macdonald wants to do with this offense, I think there's some personnel changes that need to be made. And you can start with the offensive line. And a player that had a great season for Baltimore this year is Patrick McCarry, who has played tackle. He's actually played both tackle positions. He's played both guard positions. He only gave up 1 sack this year. PFF gave him a 70-plus grade in pass protection. So, you know, Geno Smith would be excited about that. He can get after it in the run game as well. He's a tough, physical-minded player. And for goodness sakes, get a legitimate fullback. And I think Mike Macdonald is going to want that. Go get Patrick Ricard. Like, look, if you want to have a black and blue division type football team,
can't help yourself, can you?
You've got to get, and listen, the run game is in vogue right now. Like, you look at the best teams, they can run the football. It is coming back. Go get a big, nasty dude that can surprise. Patrick Ricard can catch the football like a loaf of bread. He can make some plays, but he is a nasty 265, 270-pound fullback. He's been doing it for a long time. He's still really good. If I'm Mike Macdonald, Josh Shire, I'm saying, we really would like to bring you in to block for Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. You talk about beef. Let's get some backfield beef. Patrick Ricard going from Baltimore to Seattle. To me, those two guys, if you were able to bring in at the guard position, Patrick McCarry, and you can get Patrick Ricard. Really, I want the Baltimore Patricks to just transfer to Seattle. Let's get these guys in offense. Let's get some nastiness. And I think it will help your run game. It would open up your play action game. And like I said, Ricard will occasionally surprise you plucking some balls out of the flats and turn upfield and trucking dudes. He's still got plenty of good football left in him. I'm going to be watching those two bruisers, one in the line, one in the backfield. And I'm excited. I always love watching those guys play. Just love the way Baltimore plays offense. You know Mike Macdonald wants to emulate that in Seattle, but you got to have the personnel to do it. Go get yourself some beef up front and in the backfield. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Seattle's own upcoming free agent class, including 10 unrestricted free agents, some restricted free agents, and exclusive rights free agents. We'll be talking about which players we think should be back and which ones we have the biggest question marks and whether they will return in 2025. Make sure you listen and enjoy all the playoff games this weekend, and go Hawks.